Hi everyone, Paul Kagabine at the Garland County Library, and I'm here today with Casey Hardaway, who is the Southwest Regional Educator with Arkansas Game and Fish Commission. So welcome, Casey.
Hey, thanks for having me, Paul.
Absolutely. Today is the first episode in a new series that we hope to have monthly on the second Sunday afternoon of every month, where she talks about a different topic that involves Arkansas Game and Fish. So today, here in January, we're going to start with shed antlers. So interesting facts about deer and their antlers, and when and how to search for shed antlers. So you've got a great presentation in store for us. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, sounds good. All right, well, hi again, everyone. Thanks for joining with us today. Big thanks to Paul at the Garland County Library for organizing this. I just want to start out by telling you a little bit about me. So I'm the regional educator for Southwest Arkansas. I've worked for Game and Fish for 4 years now, and I have some of the most incredible coworkers. I have the opportunity to work closely with our wildlife officers who, they enforce the rules that keep us safe and wildlife healthy. And I get to team up with biologists and researchers who collect and analyze the data and do the boots on the ground conservation work that really makes Arkansas just the beautiful natural state that it is. But I'm not an authority on regulations or technical knowledge. I'm an educator who gets to work and spend time with the people who are. And so I won't be able to answer all of your questions today. I want you to think of this as a shed hunting 101 and not a master class. But if you think of any questions that I can't answer definitively, I'm happy to put you in touch with the professionals who can, those who are specific to your area. And let's see, we're here to talk about shed hunting. Let's go. If you are a deer hunter, you are probably at least somewhat familiar with shed hunting. This is a great pastime that anyone can enjoy, whether you're an avid hunter or a casual wildlife observer. And I have some tips to share with you that hopefully can spark an enthusiasm for shed hunting if you haven't been, or if you haven't been in a while. When I say sheds, like Paul said, I'm talking about shed antlers. Antlers are just this incredibly cool piece of animal anatomy that only grow on animals in the deer family, Cervidae. Here in Arkansas, the cervids, or the deer that we have two, the white-tailed deer and the Rocky Mountain elk. And in these species, antlers typically grow on males. If you see antlers on a female white-tailed deer, that has to do with the testosterone imbalance. It can happen, but typically it's a male trait. The primary function of antlers is for sparring and for looking nice for the ladies. The stuff that dudes need to do to ensure reproduction. Growing antlers requires a lot of nutrients. So the lady does are like this guy with the big antlers. He has a whole lot of resources, and he's pretty much like the human equivalent of the smart, rich, handsome guy when you see a buck with really big antlers. So that's what they're thinking. That's what these big bucks are going for. Other deer around the world, you know that the rule in nature is that nature does not follow our rules. Antlers are generally thought of as a male secondary sex characteristic, but there are some species in the deer family like caribou or reindeer. Their females often do grow antlers, and those antlers are smaller than that of a male caribou, but they're still present, and you can see that cute little picture of the mama caribou with her calf. There are some deer species that actually grow antlers as well as tusks, like the muntjac deer. And then there's the Chinese water deer down there that has tusks. And the reason I mention that is because evolutionarily, deer had tusks first, which slowly over time evolved into antlers, serving the same kind of purpose. And antlers actually appeared about 17 million years ago in the fossil record. So they've served their purpose for a long time, and they're pretty cool. But none of these species are found naturally in Arkansas, so we won't go into detail about them. I just wanted to mention that antlers are cool and different all across the world. Here in the southwest region of the state, we're mostly talking about white-tailed deer. I mentioned that we do have elk in Arkansas. They're up north, so you won't have any luck finding shed elk antlers around here unless you're searching on a high fence hunting ranch with pinned elk. But we're going to talk a little bit more about where to look for shed antlers in a minute. So antlers and tusks, but not horns. You hear a lot of people say buck horns. When I was a kid, my dad was on a deer lease managed by the Buckhorn Hunting Club. It was a really cool name for a hunting club, but allow me to be pedantic. Antlers are not technically the same as horns. Antlers are found on cervids, like I said, the deer family, and antlers are made completely of bone. They're typically branched, and those branches, they're called the points and the tines, and they shed or fall off every single year. Horns, on the other hand, are found on bovids. That's things like your cows and your goats, and they have a bony core with a keratin sheath. The keratin, the stuff your fingernails is made out of, and that covers the horn. Horns are not branched. They're just like a single head spike on each side, and they're a permanent part of the animal. They don't fall off annually. In bovids, it varies from one species to another on whether or not the females are going to have horns, but many of them do. If you've ever been chased by a mama cow who hasn't been dehorned, you know. And the root word in Cervidae, cur, it comes from an old word that means horn or to grow. So it is really common in everyday language to refer to antlers as horns, and you'll often hear seasoned shed hunters refer to shed antlers as dropped horns. And I had to get all pedantic just for a minute to tell you that it's not necessary to be pedantic. It's just like saying poison when you mean venom in a snake. It's not technically correct, but it's close enough, and it just doesn't really matter. Just a little bit more etymology on this topic. Cervid comes from the word that means horn, and antler comes from a French word that basically means branch horn behind the eye. So that's just exactly what it is. Antlers are a lot like horns, serving some of the same purposes. I mentioned that antlers fall off and regrow each year. Each antler grows from a pedicle right there at the base of the horns. While an antler is growing, it is covered with highly vascular skin called velvet. And that velvet supplies oxygen and nutrients to the growing bone. The photo in the top right there, it shows a buck with a velvet antler on one side and a fully developed antler on the other. I like this image because it kind of shows the change over time with the velvet first, and then as the antler grows, what it looks like. It can also look pretty gross when bucks start rubbing the velvet off of their antlers. That, it's skin, it's full of blood and that vascular tissue. So it starts coming off, and the deer they rub it off. And when they do that, it exposes that sharp bone, all of those points underneath. So the growth in the antlers is happening there at the tips. And that new growth is cartilage tissue at first, and then it becomes bone tissue as it hardens over time. Once the antler has achieved its full size, the velvet is lost, and the antler's bone dies, and the dead bone structure is the mature antler. Antlers, I already mentioned just how weird they are. They're one of the weirdest and most exaggerated cases of male secondary sexual traits anywhere in the animal kingdom because they grow so fast. They require so many nutrients. It's the fastest growing mammal bone in existence. And they do all that just to fall off and do it again the next year. As a result of their fast growth rate, antlers are considered a handicap. It's hard on the deer to grow antlers. They have such a high nutritional demand to feed those antlers and then fall off and regrow annually. And because of that handicap, it's an honest signal of metabolic efficiency and food gathering capability. So once again, that's really attractive for does during their mating season because they see that and it signals, those big antlers let you know that deer is really good at acquiring resources. Here in Arkansas, our deer hunting season, it starts in the fall, which is a really good time of year to harvest deer because the mating season is about to get started. So the fall hunting season, that's after the fawns, the baby deer have grown enough since they were born. They can survive if their mother is harvested and does are not pregnant yet. They haven't began that mating season ritual. And also, it's a cool time of year to go deer hunting because the bucks have their really cool antlers and they have this funny behavior that they display during the mating season that just makes it a really fun time of year to deer hunt. Very early in that deer hunting season, it is possible to harvest a buck who still has that velvet on his antlers. They're still growing. And very late in the season, when the days are starting to get longer again and the buck's testosterone levels start to drop, it's possible to harvest a deer whose antlers fall off during the impact of the shot or shortly after if he runs after the shot. So you can hit both sides of that antler growth window during the deer season. And now what happens when those antlers fall off is the bone at the base of the antler has been destroyed by osteoclasts. And osteoclasts are just those cells that dissolve bone. Mammals have them. Even humans have osteoclasts. They're normal. They restructure our growing bones. It's kind of like the odontoclasts in baby teeth that dissolve that bone and let the baby teeth fall out. It's kind of the same process that's going on with deer. So when a deer's antler falls off through this natural process, that's when it is considered a shed. So that's what sheds are. But why would anyone want to go shed hunting? I mean, it's not like real deer hunting, is it? But shed hunting can be its own kind of fun. People who like to go shed hunting say it's kind of like an Easter egg hunt for adults. It's just exciting. And to me, hunting for sheds is a little bit like hunting for fossils or finding an arrowhead on a riverbank. It's just really exciting to find one. And, sometimes you can stumble upon one by accident. It's like, oh, cool, look what I found. I mean, you're going to pick it up and look more closely at it the same way you would if you found a fossilized shark's tooth or any other cool thing in nature. But you can also be more strategic about shed hunting. And that's because, they're seasonal. They haven't been laying there for hundreds or millions of years. You can plan your shed hunt just like a traditional meat eating hunt. You can scout for sheds for a lot of reasons. It can be a way to keep pursuing deer after the hunting season ends. Deer hunting season is winding down. It's over here in Arkansas, but shed hunting is just starting to pick up and get good. And finding those sheds can provide insights like letting you know what kind of bucks are on the property where you're hunting and where they're moving late in the season as opposed to early in the season. You might get lucky and find a shed that matches with the deer on game camera and know that either that buck survived the harvest so you can try again to get him next year, or you might find a really big shed from a buck you didn't know you had because he was avoiding your game camera. So you can learn a lot about what's out there by shed hunting. And shed hunting also has the potential to be more social than deer hunting. This is really my favorite thing about it because you don't have to stay camouflaged or be quiet or cover your scent. None of the things that you worry about when you're meat hunting for deer. You can just take off walking, very little planning ahead required as long as you know some basic facts. You can just go when the mood hits you, and you can walk if that's your thing. In certain places, you might ride four-wheelers or look out the window of your car and just hang out with friends and look. You can talk back and forth, and you might even be more successful with more eyes on the ground. So that's a fun thing about shed hunting. You just kind of get to hang out and do it with other people. You're not sitting alone in a stand or on the ground. Definitely gather up some friends for a shed hunting adventure. You can even go alone if that's your thing. Stay focused, really focus on that shed hunt, maybe be more successful, have a nice, peaceful walk through the great outdoors. And also, if you have young kids, especially if they're a little bit timid about hunting, shed hunting can be a great introduction, like a foot in the door to real deer hunting, because there's no pressure to keep the kids quiet or still or entertained. They're not going to get bored because they're out looking for stuff. And you can teach your kids about deer behavior, like where deer like to go and what they like to eat, because all of this is going to make them better shed hunters and eventually better real hunters. And they might even get to experience the excitement of finding a trophy. So this picture here, this is my daughter. This is from a few years ago after we had just a really unusually successful shed hunt. I mean, they're not always that good. All of those were found in one day in one area. And we just got really lucky that day. We timed it right. And this was back before she harvested her first deer. So I would say that shed hunting really sparked an interest for her to go deer hunting for meat hunting. A couple of years after this, she did harvest her first deer, and it was really exciting. But maybe you're wondering if it is responsible or ethical or even legal to pick up those sheds. And I can put your mind at ease in one regards. So you've all heard, I'm sure, that a disease called CWD has been spreading through our deer herd in Arkansas since 2016. CWD, or chronic wasting disease, is a contagious and fatal disease affecting animals in the cervid family, our deer and our elk. And we really do need to be careful not to harm deer by doing things that could spread the disease amongst the herd. And so certain regulations have been put in place to keep us from risking that spread. For example, it's unlawful to import, transport, or possess in Arkansas any portion of a deer, elk, moose, or caribou harvested outside the state, except in low-risk items. And shed antlers are, in fact, one of those low-risk items. So that's good to know. You can take ease in that. Also, there's no reason to be concerned about humans catching the disease. So even if you pick up an antler that fell from a diseased deer, you can't catch it yourself. No concerns there. Antlers are considered low-risk items once either after they shed naturally or after they're cleaned as part of the skull. So there's no reason not to move those around. They can be safely transported across state and county lines. However, there is one exception. It's not likely that a broken antler will spread CWD, but it is still a possibility. So I wanted to make you guys aware. Antlers can break while they're still growing, while the velvet is still on them. And they can break in a number of ways. Bucks use antlers for sparring. And so sometimes after a fight, after they've clashed horns, one of those antlers will break off while the velvet could still be attached. There's still some soft tissue on it. Or after a deer is struck by a car. We see that a lot in Southwest Arkansas, lots of deer strikes. So that's something else that could break off that velvet antler. And if it has some of that soft tissue and blood still on it, it would probably be irresponsible to, pick up that broken velvet antler in a CWD county and drop it on the ground in a green county. I don't know why anybody would do that. It's a very unlikely scenario, but it's just worth taking into consideration and just being aware of. So just to recap all that, you're not going to catch CWD from a shed, but you should still always be mindful of all of the ways that you interact with deer and the ways that your activity can foster the spread from one deer to another. We don't want to do that. And where you go shed hunting matters too. So you might be thinking of going on your own land or maybe searching on a public area, and different rules and techniques for each are going to apply. On public land, please don't get caught breaking any laws, or just don't break any laws and don't have any intention to. I do read the Facebook comments, so I know what some people think about breaking laws, but even if you think those laws are silly, they were put in place by thoughtful professionals, and those laws and rules and regulations, they exist for a reason. So that being said, it is, in fact, usually illegal to take anything off of public land. Just like digging up plants on public land, it can diminish threatened ecosystems. My office is based here at the Grandview Blackland Prairie. We have very diverse wildflowers and prairie grasses here. And we ask people not to, we got some pretty flowers, but people can't just come dig them up. In a river, moving river rocks can be harmful to egg-laying creatures. Every little thing plays its role in the ecosystem, and shed antlers do too. They also serve an ecological role. Many of the sheds people find have teeth marks on them, especially if they've been laying there since the previous year. You can kind of see the teeth marks in the photos there. That's going to be from rodents like mice and rabbits and squirrels, and those little critters will gnaw on antlers to dull their ever-growing teeth. And antlers provide a source of calcium and other minerals to these small mammals. In some areas, you'll notice greater antler damage from these little teeth marks if you're picking up sheds than other places. And what that tells you, if all of the sheds you find have been thoroughly chewed on by squirrels, that's an indication that the soil in that area is lacking in calcium. And so, removing that source of supplemental nutrition that sheds can provide can, sometimes be harmful to those little prey species, those little rodents that rely on them for that dose of calcium they get. It's just one example of how very small influences, at the bottom of the food chain can have repercussions. That's just some little thing to think about if you are tempted to pick up a shed in an area where doing so is prohibited. There is a real reason why people should just leave stuff alone. And the great thing about it is you can shed hunt even if you don't plan on keeping the shed. So remember how I said shed hunting is like hunting for arrowheads? Definitely illegal to remove any artifacts like arrowheads and pottery from public land. But that doesn't mean that you can't look. I mean, you don't have to keep every cool thing you find. You can, go for a nice walk, enjoy the search, take pictures, and then just leave it where it is. It's like that leave no trace principle that says take nothing but photos and leave nothing but footprints. I think that's a good idea. And it's the right and ethical thing to do, even if you can get away with it. But footprints, they can have an impact too. When you're walking around in wildlife habitat, you are in fact scaring the wildlife away. And this can be really stressful to animals during the winter when food sources are scarce, which is also when shed hunters would like to get started on their pursuits. So the timing and intensity of your shed hunt, those are both important. We'll talk about that in a following slide, but just keep in mind that it's especially true on public land, because a lot of times those public land areas are natural areas protecting certain kinds of habitat that might not exist in other places. So just be extra mindful in those areas. But private land is an option. Maybe you want to check your own land for sheds if you're lucky enough to have any. That's super great. If you own private land, you have more freedom to keep what you find. If you've considered the impact and you still think it's worth it. And you can make the search easier by driving around. You can drive your car or your four-wheeler on your own private land where you might not be able to on public land. And that makes it easier to cover more ground. Something else for private landowners, you may want to check your ponds, because deer do lose antlers while they're getting a drink. And the cool thing about that is the water can preserve sheds from rodents, those rodents that chew on them and kind of make the sheds not as pretty. If they fall in the water's going to keep the rodents from chewing them up. And shed antlers can last for years in the water. So if you've got private land and you want to look for sheds, it doesn't hurt to get a rake, maybe put a long pole on the rake and just kind of drag that rake on the edges of your pond. You might be surprised what it turns up. But if you don't own public land, or private land, you can ask landowners for permission to hunt their property. The thing about it is nearly 90% of land in Arkansas is privately owned. And that sounds like a lot, but Arkansas is actually blessed to have a lot of public land compared to some places. And some of that 90% of private land is owned by corporations, but a whole lot of it is agricultural land owned by a small farm family. And gaining access to private land, it can open up a lot of opportunities in places where public land is limited. And it really doesn't hurt to ask for permission to hunt someone's property. I mean, the worst thing someone can tell you is no. But if you are able to get permission to hunt someone else's land, be sure to get it in writing. It can be a handwritten note or a text or an email. And don't forget, if someone, gives you the privilege of hunting on private land, always be respectful while you're there. Close gates behind you. Don't leave any trash. And also try to share what you find with the landowner. A lot of deer hunters get permission to go hunting on private land, and it's super common for those hunters to share the meat that they harvest with the landowner. And I think that if you ask somebody for permission to go shed hunting on their land, they probably just want to see what's out there. You might discover a buck they didn't know they had, or maybe more antlers than they were aware of. So that's cool information, and they might not mind having boots on the ground, somebody out there looking for what's going on, and they might be really interested in what you have to find. So now that we've thought a little bit about where to go, we need to consider when to go, because you don't want to stress the animals out. And the key to getting that right is timing it right. And it's also going to make you more successful. So it's actually not too early to start shed hunting right now. I found a couple of good sheds just 8 days ago. Yeah, it was on the first day of the new year. I went for a first day walk and found a couple of sheds. So shortly after the fall rut, a buck's testosterone levels start dropping. That's taking place right now. And after the winter equinox, which happened back on December 21st, that means that the days are starting to get longer, and that bucks respond to those longer days physiologically by activating those osteoclasts that I mentioned earlier. They dissolve the bone where the antlers attach to the head. But not all bucks have this response at the same time. You can kind of think of it as waiting for a little kid to lose a loose tooth or something. And if you want a kid to lose a loose tooth, you tell them to bite into an apple, because sometimes that gentle impact, that crunch, is all it takes to jar loose that loose tooth. And when you're thinking about shed hunting, ditches are like the apples of the deer world. Sometimes when an antler is ready to fall, the impact of a deer jumping a ditch is all it takes to jar it loose. So roadside ditches are a really good place to start. I've had a lot of success in ditches. And by sticking to roadsides, you're going to have less of an impact on deer behavior. Deer are already expecting to be disturbed by vehicles on roads, so you're not going to be scaring them away from their most valuable food and bedding areas. And sheds can be easier to see in ditches too. If a shed falls into like a pile of leaves out in the woods or in some tall unmowed grass, it can be really hard to spot until you're right up on it. But most ditches are mowed a little bit shorter, and the sheds are just going to be less likely to be concealed by, those deceptively white sticks you see growing in fields and tall grass. And I hope you guys can see the shed in this picture. This is the one I found right there on that roadside just a little over a week ago. So yeah, this time of year, stick to the roadsides where you're having less of an impact on deer movement. And then next month, February's coming up. This is a picture of a shed. It's not a great shed, but I was happy to find it. I found it last year on a fence row at the end of February. And I would say that, judging by its color, it had been laying there for a few weeks. The bleaching on the tines indicates it had weathered some rain and sun, but it's still pretty brown at the base, which tells me it's not an old shed. Sheds that have been laying on the ground for a year or more, they'll be pretty much completely bleached white. And they're also way more likely to have teeth marks from rodents, and this one doesn't have any teeth marks. So found at the end of February, probably dropped the end of January or the beginning of February. But remember that in February, food is still going to be pretty scarce. Food being scarce for deer, that doesn't mean that you should feed your deer corn to help them out. or keep them on your property when they're shedding their antlers. Deer, they've survived some pretty harsh winters without help from people for many, many years. They have adaptations to help them survive. They're going to grow a thicker winter coat of fur. They're going to spend a lot more time resting and bedded down. They can actually bed down and slow their metabolism to half of its summer rate. And that lets deer go days and days without eating or even moving. They're just relying on their fat stores. And when they're hunkered down like that, you really don't want to spook them out of their beds. That's just putting stress on the animal that, they don't need. And plus, if it's that cold, you're probably not going to have fun getting out shed hunting either. So it's going to benefit you and the deer to just kind of leave those February days where it's really cold, to not disturb them as much. And you can do that by sticking to field edges and fence rows instead of walking really deep into the deer's habitat. Arkansas weather, it's weird. It can mean a week of spring-like sunshine. Sometimes my peaches start blooming in February, and then the next week there's a foot of snow and sub-freezing temperatures, and it's just crazy. And, the amount of pressure you put on deer hunting deer during February should really, it's going to depend on that temperature outside and the availability of the deer, the food that the deer like to eat this time of year. Deer browse, mostly. They're browsing animals. They're going to browse on woody vegetation. Some of the things that I've noticed browsed recently are like the American beautyberry twigs. They like poison ivy. So keep that in mind if you're shed hunting. Poison ivy doesn't have leaves on it this time of year, so it's a little bit harder to recognize. But if you can recognize those vines, you'll probably notice that deer have been browsing on it. And greenbriers. They love greenbriers. I like greenbriers. They taste like celery or something to me, but deer eat them up. And so on warm February days, you can walk fence rows and field edges, and you can check for signs that deer have been browsing on, some of those briars. You can check for deer scat in those areas. And if you see a game trail, off of those field edges, if it has deer tracks on it, you can walk into it a ways to check for sheds. Just, don't go real deep and hard hunting yet. February is still a little bit early for that. Stick to edges. And then March and later, so that photo I showed earlier of my daughter with all of those shed antlers in her hair, those were found in March. We had timed it just right and got really lucky on that day. And I remember that there were jonquils blooming all over. And so that's kind of my cue when I'm thinking about shed hunting. When I see jonquils blooming, when it feels like spring outside, still a little bit cold, but there are new plants growing and blooming, that's the best time to make an all-day activity of shed hunting. The majority of deer will have shed their antlers by that time, and they'll be, moving around and looking for their spring food sources. There are pros and cons to waiting until March. If you're too late to the game, someone else may have beat you to the easy-to-spot sheds laying on the field edges and ditches, but that's okay because now that it's a little bit later in the year, you can go a little bit deeper. Still start on those field edges because you might get lucky and find a freshly dropped shed. That still happens in March. When you see game trails, follow them and be looking for evergreen trees because deer love to bed around cedar and pine. Cedar and pine, their leaves stay dry when they're on the ground compared to oak leaves that, fall on the ground and they're kind of wet and muddy. So that's going to be one of those bedding areas where that deer has laid. Sometimes they lay there for days without getting up, and there's a good chance that he could have shed his antlers in that spot while he was sitting there. So look for those good bedding areas. Deer also utilize the warmth of a south-facing slope. Being on the south side of a hill protects deer from the cold north winds, and it puts them in the sun for longer periods of the day. If you're ever out walking around on a cold day and you start walking up the south side of a hill, you can feel the temperature difference, and deer feel that too. I've probably wasted a lot of time on south-facing slopes because it's warm there and it's just a little bit more fun to look for sheds. And you think, oh, if I was a deer, this is where I'd be bedded down. And sometimes you do get lucky on those areas and find some good sheds there. You should also keep an eye out for things like red oak. They're small acorn shells. Red oak acorns rot really slowly, and it's a good winter food source for deer. So anywhere that you see red oaks, that could be a place where a deer was recently feeding. Even though by March there's not likely to be a lot of acorns left, you can still go back and look where they were feeding during the winter. And I also want to mention, don't get too distracted by rub lines. This has happened to me a lot of times. So a rub it's a small tree with the bark missing where a deer has kind of rubbed his antlers on it. And this looks like promising deer sign, and it's not impossible. You might get lucky and find a deer shed in one of these high traffic rub line areas where you just see deer sign after deer sign. But the thing about it is those sheds or those rubs are getting kind of old, and the deer are not going to be moving in the same places during the winter that they were during the rut. So these rub areas, they're from mating season, and the deer, the bucks with their big antlers, they're not necessarily going to be moving in those same places. So that's not the best deer sign to look for when you're out shed hunting. Sticking to areas with winter food sources, areas that provide good bedding, and then the paths in between those two areas. Those are your best bet for picking up sheds there in March. And don't be too disappointed if what you thought was a shed antler turns out to be like a bleached stick or an armadillo skull or a honey locust pod, all pictured here. When searching for sheds, your eyes are trained on, those little spikes of white or the curve of a beam, and sometimes a false start can turn into a treasure of its own. I really did think that armadillo skull was a shed. I saw it from a distance. I marched 100 yards to pick it up, and it wasn't the shed I was looking for, but it was still a pretty cool find. I kept it. It's in my office now. But your technique when you're looking for sheds, you're training your eyes for that little spike of white out there, that curved shape. You're going to scan the distance out in front of you, and then always bring your focus back to the ground right by your feet, because sometimes a shed will be hidden by debris until you are literally just right above it. And, sometimes you look out in the distance and think you see one and run towards it, and it's a bone, but it's not the bone you were looking for. So, and with that, I just want to wish you all a happy shed hunting season. Those photos were some of my big guys that I'm going to be looking for in the next couple of months. I don't know if you guys can still see my pictures, but there we go. There's so Scrapper here, he's been in the background of all of these slides. I named him that that's the mascot of the team. Some kids saw Scrapper walking behind our shotgun range, and so I set up my game camera out there where they saw him, and I got some more good photos. Right by him is Wide Guy, and then Crab Claw. He's the one I'm really excited about. So I'm going to be shed hunting on the Nature Center grounds. This is public land. Hunting is not allowed here, but we're located right next to a wildlife management area with strict hunting regulations. And thanks to the documentation done by the WMA staff, I can be pretty confident that none of these bucks were harvested this year, which is good news for me, because I'm going to be looking for their sheds. Since this is public land and rules are different in different places, I specifically asked for permission from our manager to look for these sheds. Normally we don't allow people to pick them up, but since these are going to be used for educational purposes, my picking them up doesn't violate any rules. I'm going to do some private land shed hunting too. And I wish you guys luck, and I hope you have happy shed hunting.
Well, thanks, Casey. That was a fun, interesting program.
Cool. It was good to be here, Paul.
Absolutely. We have a few questions and comments.
Cool.
Candace says another fun fact. I guess fun fact about antlers. They are nature's fastest growing tissue known to man. Only tumors and embryos grow new tissue at the same rate.
Right. That is cool. They grow crazy fast. I mean, in just a few months, from the little nub to some of these huge antlers that we see.
JP says we used to have bucks that come to our farm for the winter food, and it was a sight to see. But a couple years ago, they just stopped. How can I encourage them to come back?
Oh man, having good habitat can be kind of a challenge and a puzzle to figure out. We actually have private lands biologists who will come out to your farm and kind of look at what you got and maybe write a management plan to help you have better wildlife habitat, maybe bring those bucks back. Maybe if something obvious has changed, like if you started mowing your grass, or if you got a different kind of grass growing out there, something like fescue that's going to crowd out your forbs and the things that are keeping your deer there longer, that's going to be a problem. But yeah, definitely reach out to the private lands biologist in your region, and they can give you a specific answer and how to improve your specific farm for wildlife habitat.
Great question from William. He asked, what can we learn about health of the local deer population from their shed antlers?
Okay, so we can learn a lot. That's a great question. So the photos I showed on my last slide, those are Grandview deer, and Grandview grows, our deer grow really big antlers because we have the right kind of nutrients in the ground, and they're getting the right kind of food from the forbs and the woody browse and all the things that they like to eat that grow out here. We just grow them big and healthy because we have good habitat, and it takes a lot of nutrients for a deer to grow, the fastest growing mammal bone known to man. So we can tell by picking up their shed antlers, just what kind of nutrients they're getting that they can afford to drop them off. So anywhere that you have big, healthy sheds, you've got good habitat. And you can tell the age too. I've got several. I found this little guy. I mean, he's not unhealthy. He's just young. This one is too, because these were all found in the same area that this big shed was found in. This is a pretty healthy deer, nice 10 point. And then this, my older, this weird looking guy, it's still a big antler. So, you can kind of tell that we have an age diversity, which is good. Lots of things we can learn.
Very interesting. And we have one last comment from Cody, who says, on top of all the other reasons you mentioned on why shed hunting is good fun, you don't have to worry about ticks so much.
Absolutely. That's the best reason right there. And mosquitoes too. Can't believe I forgot that. Good job, Cody.
Yeah. So, lots of unpleasant things outside in the summer, in the spring or late spring.
Yeah. The cold winter days, it really is fun to just get out there and shed hunt and be noisy and holler and find your trophies. It's cool.
Very interesting program, and I hope the viewers, present and future, learn a lot. This program was recorded, so I encourage you to share it on Facebook or YouTube or even Twitter. We started broadcasting our programs there as well. So appreciate your time, Casey. And this was episode 1 of what we hope to be an ongoing series. And we have our next episode booked for Sunday, February 13th, same time, 2 p.m. in the afternoon. Do you want to tell them what that topic's going to be?
Oh, it's going to be about wild turkeys. Yeah.
Excellent.
Turkeys and turkey hunting. It's going to be fun. I can't wait to see you guys there.
Yep. So please tune into that. And again, thanks for watching. And thank you, Casey. Any final remarks, any events coming up with Game and Fish, or just you want to remind them where they can find you?
Well, our youth shooting sports season is about to start up. So if anybody wants to come see me at Grandview and shoot a round of trap on our shotgun range, holler at me. Come out here and get your practice in. We're looking forward to a good season.
Excellent. All right. Well, until then, take care.
All right. Thanks, Paul. Bye, you guys.